Welcome to the Altruistic Libertarian, advocate for a genuinely free society. I'm Anthony Wheeler, and today we complete our series on pervasive intervention. Philosophers through millennia have advocated one type of society or another. Science fiction is rife with alternatives, but these social engineers are thrice flawed. First of all, the target society is often unpalatable, either by being completely impractical, that is, flying headlong in the face of human nature, for instance, or one that demands the insectivization of humanity. Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, in the former case, and Plato's Republic, in the latter. The utopia of B.F. Skinner's Walden 2 is a particularly horrid example, as is the dystopia in Ayn Rand's Anthem. Secondly, even if the vision is perfect, and the target society capable of providing humanity with endless bliss and satisfaction, there is no guarantee that assembling the perfect society would actually fulfill every promise. Society is too complex, and humans too unpredictable to effectively forecast the quality of life within any given construct. Most likely some people would profit, and others would suffer, in ways utterly unpredictable. The possibility that such a society would surpass one that is genuinely free is remote, given that free individuals in a free society would have the opportunity to strive for what they desire and not be limited by another's vision or forced to live in ways they find undesirable. And finally, the cost of forcibly molding society into something different would be, and always has been, enormous. Consider the French Revolution, for instance, or the Russian Revolution, or the cost in human suffering experienced within the European nations occupied by Soviet Russia after World War II. Can the results really justify the cost in human lives and suffering? Karl Popper agrees, and I quote, "Social life is so complicated that few men, or none at all, could judge a blueprint for social engineering on the grand scale. Whether it be practicable, whether it would result in real improvement, what kind of suffering it may involve, and what may be the means for its realization." Unquote. As for the altruistic libertarian, we purposely avoid any prognostications. We have no targeted society in mind. We don't advocate any particular blend of social structures or living arrangements. We don't demand that people live in one way or another. If people are free and evil virtually eliminated, it doesn't matter what individuals construct in the way of institutions, traditions, personal habits, cultural delights, or social contracts. Nothing would be designed from the top. There would be no top. But instead, social structures would evolve peacefully, harmoniously, and without violent intervention. When the government intervenes in society, the consequences are not always predictable or agreeable. The myriad of government programs known collectively as welfare serves as an excellent example. The programs intended to help the poor actually tend to keep people in poverty by creating disincentives to work harder or earn more income. The following from The Welfare Trap: Maze of Programs Punishes Work, January 4th, 2016. I quote, "The dozens of different programs that form our tangled welfare system often impose high, effective, marginal tax rates that make it harder for low-income people to transition out of these programs and into the middle class. As the people in these programs enter the workforce, get a promotion, or work more hours, they can lose a significant portion of those earnings through reduced benefits and increased taxes. A new report from the Congressional Budget Office illustrates this predicament. Many households hovering around the poverty level face steeper effective marginal tax rates than even the highest earners. These prohibitively high tax rates can discourage work and limit their prospects, ultimately making them less likely to escape poverty. CBO's analysis looks at the range of effective marginal tax rate households face at different levels of income. The median marginal tax rate for households just above the poverty level is almost 34%, the highest for any income level. Some households that receive larger benefits or higher state taxes have even higher effective rates, 10% of households just above the poverty line face a marginal rate higher than 65%. For each additional dollar earned in this range, these households would lose almost 2/3 to taxes or lost benefits. The comparable rate for the highest earners, households above 400% of poverty level, is only 43.4%. New programs were grafted onto the existing system over time, each intended to address a perceived problem afflicting people in poverty. But they can interact in ways that can deter people from striving to create a better life for their families. That's part of the reason the status quo system, which the Government Accountability Office estimates spends $742 billion at the federal level each year, has achieved such lackluster results to date. Unquote. Perhaps a more pernicious and related consequence of the welfare programs is the impact of marriage and childbearing. The following paragraphs are excerpted from an article by Robert Rector titled Welfare and the Decline of Marriage. The author is a leading authority on poverty and welfare programs. Quote, "It is no accident that the collapse of marriage in America largely began with the war on poverty and the proliferation of means-tested welfare programs that it fostered. When the war on poverty began, only a single program, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, assisted single parents. Today, dozens of programs provide benefits to families with children, including Earned Income Tax Credit, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, Women, Infants, and Children Food Program, Supplemental Security Income, Food Stamps, Child Nutrition Programs, Public Housing, Section 8 Housing, and Medicaid." Unquote. A personal note on my experience with these programs. One summer late in my college days, in the late 70s, my roommate met a woman on the local beach. She stayed with us a week or two. She intended to get pregnant, move to California, and live on welfare. At the time, I didn't look at the situation philosophically. I just wanted to get in on the plan. Anyway, back to the article. Quote, "Although married couples with children can also receive aid through these programs, the overwhelmingly majority of assistance to families with children goes to single-parent households. The burgeoning welfare state has promoted single parenthood in two ways. First, means-tested welfare programs such as those described above financially enable single parenthood. It is difficult for single parent mothers with a high school degree or less to support children without aid of another parent. Means-tested welfare programs substantially reduce this difficulty by providing extensive support to single parents. Welfare thereby reduces the financial need for marriage. Since the beginning of the war on poverty, less educated mothers have increasingly become married to the welfare state and to the U.S. taxpayer rather than to the fathers of their children. As means-tested benefits expanded, welfare began to serve as a substitute for a husband in the home, and low-income marriage began to disappear. As husbands left the home, the need for more welfare to support single mothers increased. The war on poverty created a destructive feedback loop. Welfare promoted the decline of marriage, which generated a need for more welfare. A second major problem is that the means-tested welfare system actively penalizes low-income parents who do marry. All means-tested welfare programs are designed so that a family's benefits are reduced as earnings rise. In practice, this means that if a low-income single mother marries an employed father, her welfare benefits will generally be substantially reduced. The mother can maximize welfare by remaining unmarried and keeping the father's income off the books. Overall, the federal government operates over 80 means-tested welfare programs that provide cash, food, housing, medical care, and social services to poor and low-income individuals. Each program contains marriage penalties similar to those described above. Low-income families generally receive benefits from several programs at the same time. The marriage penalties from multiple programs, when added together, can provide substantial financial disincentives to marriage. For example, if a single mother who earns $20,000 per year marries a man who earns the same amount, the couple will typically lose about $12,000 a year in welfare benefits. In effect, the welfare system makes it economically irrational for most low-income couples to marry. Unquote. In other words, Taxpayers fund billions of dollars a year to promote unwed motherhood. Earlier in the article, Rector points to Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty as a turning point and charts the dramatic increase in children born outside of the traditional family. In 1964, when the war began, 7% of children were born to unwed mothers. By 2013, that percentage more than tripled until 41% of children were born outside of marriage. He goes on to show that the correlation of economic independence between married and unmarried families, with 37% of single-parent families requiring government assistance versus less than 7% of married families requiring such assistance. The war on poverty hasn't defeated its foe, but instead created something far more insidious, a class of poor Americans without dignity, hope, or future prospects. As in most government programs, the effort to solve one social program simply created new ones. The new social problems promulgated more programs to solve the new issue that in turn spawned more social programs, and so on. It's a never-ending cycle that will never solve the initial problem without creating so many more. This is so because, and I quote, "On the unhampered market, there prevails an irresistible tendency to employ every factor of production for the best possible satisfaction of the most urgent needs of the consumers. If the government interferes with the process, it can only impair satisfaction, it can never improve it." Unquote. Governments, in general, necessarily consume and destroy wealth, and wealth-creating investment. Sometimes this is unavoidable. Military and police forces are as costly as they are necessary. Yet the more government intervenes, in terms of taxes, regulation, deficit spending, and prohibition, the less productive society and the increase in relative poverty. There are still prominent thinkers, however, who openly acknowledge the need for sacrifice, that is, reduced standards of living and lower quality of life for some, if not everyone, to achieve socialistic goals. And I quote, "A lot of functional activity would be needed to achieve a situation in which we did not have to live so functionally. In the modern age, this project has been known as socialism. There is potentially tragic conflict here between the means and the end. If we have to act instrumentally in order to create a less means-ends obsessed form of life, then we have to live in a way which by our own admission is less than desirable. At the worst, it may mean that some people, tragically, may feel the need to sacrifice their own happiness for others. To call this tragic means that such sacrifice is not the most desirable way to live. Morality is about fulfilling the self, not abnegating it. It is just that for some people, abnegating it may be historically necessary for bringing that desirable form of life about. There are, tragically, situations in which the self can be fulfilled only by being relinquished." Unquote. Eagleton's vision is a fool's errand. As a socialist society he envisions will never become manifest, yet the sacrifices in human lives, human potential, and human happiness can be made quite real in the attempt. Every step the government takes on a socialist road, Obamacare for instance, is another strike against a genuinely free society and another degradation of human potential. In a word, the more government intervenes in society, the less wealth available for the pursuit of human values. A decrease in available capital for investment in improved productivity and technological advance, increased risk of economic stagnation, and ultimately an overall reduction in human potential. Well, that concludes our show for today and our exploration of pervasive intervention. In the next episode, we review an intervention case study, one that features AT&T. Until then, peace.